Welcome to Building Wealthy Habits podcast. Now, this features content and conversations with me, Randy Barkley, Jeremiah Lee, along with Laura Lee. On this podcast, we share financial advice from a team of certified financial planners, including a California licensed attorney, an MBA professional with collective experience of over 40 years.
On this week's episode of Building Wealthy Habits, we talk about myth busters regarding an estate plan. Why do I need one? I don't need one, right? So this is for anyone who has thought twice about the purpose of creating an estate plan. We talk with Jeremiah Lee, California licensed attorney, and he offers his expertise on the subject matter. We hope you enjoy. Okay, but have you tried the campfire flavor?
Oh, I've tried all of them. That might be one of my favorites.
Oh, good. You like it too.
Yes. It's hard to beat a good old chocolate chip. We are talking about in our office. We are located in the Brockton Arcade here in Riverside, just next to the Riverside Cookie Shop, which is kind
fantastic.
of a Riverside institution, I'd say, of cookies. And all they make is cookies. And often if you're not there by, 3 p.m., they sell out and you can't get whatever your favorite cookie was.
And they do ship for any of our listeners that are not in the Riverside area.
Yeah. So we each week we get fresh cookies. So people come in the office, they get a local treat, and some of their flavors are good, classic, chocolate chip, peanut butter, things like that. But they make a Riverside cookie, which has like an orange zest to it. They make, like you were saying, a campfire cookie, which is kind of like a s'more made into a cookie. Any other highlights or ones that are some of your favorites?
Well, she picked for me this week, the owner, and so there was a strawberry lemonade cookie that I've not tried, but it's been sort of calling my name from the refrigerator, and the lemon is a great, really, you can't go wrong. Like, let's just be honest. But our goal here was just to kind of, I always say to our clients, we want to sweeten the deal. Definitely don't want it to feel like you're coming to for your like next dental checkup when you have to come in to visit us.
Right. I mean, we're talking about finances anyways, which, our goal is people get excited about their finances, but the reality is sometimes it's a lot to talk about. And I think that my favorite of all the cookies, my favorite still might be the one they call the Cocoa Puff. It's like a chocolate cookie, but there's some sort of like a chocolatey something on the inside also. It's fantastic.
It's just delicious. Oh, we could go on and on. We're going to have to talk more about the Riverside Cookie Shop.
That's right.
So
they're good people.
And if you happen to come by our office, hey, we're always good for a cookie. So there you have it. There you go. So, but we're not really talking about cookies on this week's episode. We are going to talk about, we're going to do a good old myth busters because I think these are so great. It helps like debunk the just common, they're not always lies. We have to figure out whether or not these are myths.
They're myths, yeah. And I think these are so good because I hear them on a regular basis and people don't often have a good resource to find out what's true. And we're talking about estate planning. And when people say, when I hear a lot is, well, doesn't just go to my kids anyway? You have a number of questions, these myths, but I don't know that people have a good resource outside of coming and talking to an attorney or someone who's in the kind of a estate transition field to really get answers. Because if you Google this stuff, one, estate planning is different state by state. So if you get some information from Colorado or Wisconsin, like it's not necessarily going to apply to where you're living. But even then, there's a lot of forums and things where it's kind of difficult to get to the real law. And if you do actually find the codes, good luck. They're no fun to read.
Right.
And so there's a number of times where I'll sit down with a client, either on the financial planning side or the estate planning side. And we have kind of a real open, candid conversation. But part of that is just also educating of what happens. What are some of these myths? So we wrote down a few that I hear all the time, we hear all the time, to kind of go through some of these myths.
Right. So we're going to, we didn't want to bury the lead there, but we are talking about estate planning and what are the common myths that we tell ourselves as to why we may not need one. So listeners, you are hearing expert advice from Jeremiah Lee. He is a California licensed attorney. He's also a certified financial planner and the CEO of Tricord Advisors. So he brings just a whole myriad of expertise to this week's episode. So drum roll, please. The first myth is, which I think you actually already mentioned.
I was teasing it. That's right.
First myth, doesn't it all just go to my kids anyways?
Great question, right? Doesn't it? Doesn't it just go to them? Isn't that how that works? Yeah. So in California, just it's different depending on your situation. Who is this a second marriage? Is it a first marriage? Do you have kids? Do you not? There's a whole set of rules called intestate. And intestate is just a fancy word that means I died without a will. I died without a trust. I died without estate planning to dictate where my items should go.
No instructions as to what happens,
Yeah.
what I want to have happen after I die.
Yeah,
right?
Instructions not included, right?
That's
the
We're talking IKEA furniture.
Yeah,
no, I'm
that's
kidding.
Right. You got to figure it out yourself. And in California, the laws of intestacy, or if someone has no will, and it basically is trying to find somebody who could appropriately take their assets. And the first one that someone thinks of, I'm married with 2 kids. Well, my wife will get it all. In California, if you have a will, that's not true. Your wife gets a portion of it, or your spouse, we'll just say husband or wife. Your spouse gets a portion of it, but your kid's actually entitled to some portion of your estate, which when both the mother and the father or the parents have both passed away, they expect the kids to get everything. But before then, there's some other rules that you might not expect. So most spouses would not expect if their spouse passed away that at that moment they would be splitting some of the estate with their children and themselves. It's not what most people want. Most people want the estate to go to their spouse until their spouse passes away. And at that point, it then transitions to the next generation to kids. And then it gets more complicated because in California here, I would say we often have what people sometimes call Brady Bunch planning. Your kids, my kids, and our kids, prior marriages, prior kids from different marriages. And the answer to the question, don't my kids just get it anyways? As an attorney, I got to look it up. I got to trace through your specific family situation to find out what would happen to your assets if you were to pass away unexpectedly.
Yeah. And a follow-up question to that, if somebody were to ask is like, do you want it to go to your kids? Because in some scenarios, maybe they don't want it to go to their kids right away. Yeah. Maybe they don't want to give it to their kids without any restriction. Maybe they don't want to give it equally to all their kids. Or like you said, in like a blended marriage, it might be that some assets go specifically to children from a first marriage or a previous marriage and differently for ongoing. So it's a lot more complex than just like, we'll let them sort it out after I go.
When they get there. Well, and the key thing you just mentioned on, you touched a few key things, but one of the key things is when they get it. If you pass away without a will or a trust in place, it goes through the probate process and it just goes to them. So if they're 18, they're going to get their share. Whereas if you have a trust in place, you can say, well, when they're 18, take care of them, pay for school, help them out, but don't give them the money until they're 25 or 30. Give them a chance to grow up a little bit. So that's a key part of having a trust is not just who gets it, but when they get it.
In fact, we were just hosting a family meeting where we had the opportunity to reveal to the second generation the sort of financial situation that the parents were in, what they might be able to expect in terms of an inheritance, as well as directives that were included in their trust. And we talked about what the grandchildren will receive and how it will be distributed. And there was a variety of we were talking fractions and percentages, Everything was going to be divided by a third. And then from that third, 15% goes to each grandchild. And each grandchild is only eligible to receive 50% of the 15% of the 1/3 of the estate when they turn 40. Right. That's like a lot of numbers to throw around. And
it seems complicated when you sit down and say, should little Billy, how much should he get for, whatever it is? And when you look at the estate and kind of go through all the split, it made perfect sense. It was very reasonable. It was a great plan. But you're right. When you just look at it, it's it's a math problem and all sorts of stuff all wrapped into one.
Right. And so sometimes we think it's more simple than it really is.
Yep. That's right.
So, all right. We ready for myth number 2?
Yeah. It's a good one.
Doesn't a trust only matter after I'm dead?
Yeah. This usually comes on the heels of that same one that says they'll figure it out. My kids will figure it out and go from there. So scenario being somebody is not dead. They've not quite died, but they're in the hospital. And someone's got to pay a mortgage. Someone has got to get into their, bank accounts to take care of them. Somebody has to make a healthcare decision. And what happens? The person's still alive. They haven't died yet. So sometimes people put what's called a transfer on death or different names of it. But basically, it's a bank account that would transfer to somebody new once you died and say, well, when I die, they can just have the money that way. well, you're not dead. So they don't get the money. No one has access to it. No one's going to be able to get into your bank accounts to use that money for you, to care for you, to take care of you. And when I say estate planning, when I think of estate planning, it's not just a trust. A trust is the main piece, but there's things like powers of attorney for financial powers that someone can get into your bank accounts. There's healthcare directives, someone can make a choice for you. There's a lot of other pieces that are important while you're living. And the key thing, I think, a lot of people think of like, well, car accident, what about this? But think of someone who's 80, 85, they are still fine, but they're not quite with it as much as they used to be. Who's going to start making financial choices from them, and who is empowered to do that? There comes a point in a lot of people's lives where they're no longer the best person to make their own financial choices. And if you have nothing set up, you're kind of stuck. Banks won't talk to other people unless you set that beforehand. Whereas if you have a trust and an estate plan set up, it's somewhat seamless. People can walk right into your shoes to care for you. And the idea that who's going to get your stuff when you die, I mean, that matters. But for a lot of people, that's actually become secondary. It's more so, who am I empowering to care for me and use my assets while I'm still alive?
And we even think about those sort of health situations naturally towards the end of life, but we all know they can happen anytime. There are tragic accidents, car accidents, and other circumstances that happen every day, right? We're never in control. And so being able to administer what you would want to have done ahead of time if you were incapacitated, if you were not able to do it yourself. And there's all different types of powers of attorney as well. We don't spend too much time talking about it, but we've got durable power of attorney, we've got springing powers of attorney. There's ways that you can limit what they're authorized to do on your behalf, but just how critical that is to have in place, honestly, at any age. We think about estate planning in the later years of our life because it becomes more imperative, but really it's valuable at any time in our lives.
Oh, yeah. And we, because we do financial planning and estate planning, we have more than a handful of clients whose spouses passed away young and unexpectedly. And in those situations that we were working with both spouses before they passed. We'd help set things up in a financial sense as well as in a estate planning sense. And when the tragedy occurred, we were able to deal with the emotions of it and allow the client to deal with the emotions. But the actual financial and it all was set up. It all worked out. And one of them specifically was a business owner and had other partners. And so negotiating kind of the buyout of the business and transferring that value to the spouse who had now lost their spouse. It all took doing, but it was already set up. And so it was way easier than had it been if there was just nothing set up.
Absolutely. All right. Myth number 3. All I have is a house, so I won't have to go through probate, right?
Right. That's a huge one I hear. People say, well, my estate's not that big. Can I just give it to my kids? And the answer on this as a myth is generally no. Like there's some things that transfer by beneficiary designation. So we talked about in previous episodes.
Qualified retirement accounts are one example.
Yeah, 401ks, 403bs, all those types of accounts. You name someone to get your funds, and that's pretty normal. Your bank, you can set that stuff up if you'd like to, but not necessarily. A lot of people don't. But anything, I'll just jump right to it. Real estate is a huge fly in the ointment on that idea. If you think about it, if someone passes away, say a married couple that have both passed away now, both their names are on title. So the next generation, the kids, say, okay, it's time to sell the house, sell the family home, and split it up amongst the surviving kids. Well, who's going to sign that deed? They're going to look at the people who are on the deed, and they can't find them. They both passed away. So what you have to do is you have to go to a court, and the court will see that those people have passed away, find an executor, someone who's further down the line, and give them power to now sign that deed. Well, that process is called probate. So even if you have a small real estate, small house, small anything, it's still going to have to go through probate. And probate is usually 6 months to a year. It's fairly expensive. It's fairly slow. There's a lot of rules and hoops to jump through. So during that time, you just can't sell the house. And so you have to pay a gardener, maybe a security system. You have people go and check on the house periodically. It can become a burden where instead of it being, hey, we get to inherit this house, and you're mourning the loss of, say, your parents, now you're having to fight, feels like a fight through this process and work with the courts in order to get this even sold.
So what happens in the case scenario where somebody isn't even worried about an estate plan because maybe they don't have children, or they don't expect to pass it on to any close family members. So when you talk about like having a trustee, maybe they can't think of anybody, kind of, let's talk about those scenarios, because I think those are somewhat unique as well.
Yeah, those are very unique. If you get someone who doesn't have anyone in their life that they want to designate funds to, and or anyone that they would trust in their life to kind of administer their thing. So
what would happen if they did nothing?
Yes. So a lot of people think this is going to go to the state. They think, well, I need to put a trust in. I guess we could add that as another myth. I need to put something because the state's just going to take it all. That's not generally what happens. The rules of California will keep looking for somebody
like
anywhere.
Next of kin.
Yeah, and when you think of next of kin, most people are thinking brother, sister, and uncle, but it keeps going. They keep looking at, and they call this, actually in law school, they call this the laughing heir. It's the person who gets a letter, says your great twice removed Aunt Mildred passed away, and you're entitled to $3 million. And it's someone who had no personal connection, and man, what a tragedy that can be, right? That someone took the failure to plan their estate, because even if you had no children or family members, man, there's so many good causes that can be donated to say, hey, the money can really be helpful to them. We have a few clients who've actually set up foundations, and once they've passed away, that foundation lives on. We have one specifically that's giving scholarships every single year to local colleges, to local students who are, the way they have it set up is in their third or fourth year of school in college, who might not be able to finish because of financial reasons. Well, the client who was passing away said, man, that is so difficult. I don't have any kids that are going to use my money, but let's set up a foundation just to help students who hit that profile. And so it's great. His money will be used. It's being used now and probably for another decade or two to really help these kids finish college. What a great legacy beyond just that. So in order to set that up, you can't just pass away and hope for the best. You have to do some planning. And that planning is not your normal pass it to my kids. That planning is setting up a foundation to really use your money in a legacy for something that you think is valuable.
I love that, though. Maybe not being able to identify a natural trustee or someone that you wish to inherit your funds. Don't forget that there are so many different organizations, charitable activities that are looking for funds to continue the work that they do. So throughout our lives, we have different aspects that kind of pluck our heartstrings, different causes, different heartaches, and so I think that being able to the antidote to that, right, is to be able to plan some charitable donations to those sorts of organizations. So don't forget about that. That's great.
Don't forget about that. And a lot of clients that do want to include something charitable, I often encourage them not just to wait till they're dead, not just to say, hey, at my death, I'll pass it on, but get involved with that charity. I've had a number of clients who got involved with the charities that they named in their trust to a greater level, saying, hey, I want to show up at events or sit on a board, and then actually came back and changed their trust and said, the way they run things is not what I want. Or to be affirmed in that, be like, wow, they're doing such a good job. I am so excited that when I pass away, some of my funds are going to go to this charity. I think it's really important if someone is thinking about giving a gift at their death, like, go ahead and get involved with that organization now, so you understand what they're doing.
How common is it for people to inform the charity ahead of time? Or is it more common that it's kind of becomes a surprise to the charity?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I've been on both sides of that, different ways. I often advise people when it's a kind of charity of last resort, saying, hey, I'm giving it to my kids first, but if for some reason all my kids have passed away, then as a backstop, I'm going to name this charity. In that situation, there's not necessarily a gift gonna for sure happen. And so I would say, don't bother telling them. You definitely don't have to tell them either way, but usually you wouldn't. On the other side, when someone is doing a large gift and they want to name something, they want their name on a building, or they want a plaque, they want something that acknowledges them. Often there'll be a gifting agreement with the organization that says, hey, in receipt of these funds, we agree to do these 3 or 4 things, whether it's limiting the gift to a certain type of use or putting their name on something. So in those instances, if you're looking to get something from the charity, then I think a gifting agreement makes a lot of sense, to kind of make sure they're going to use the funds in the way you see fit. But hesitation I have is if you name somebody and you tell them, hey, I put you in my will, I put you in my trust, you're going to get a phone call next Christmas that says, hey, we know you're in your trust. Would you like to give any before then? Which some people might like, some may not. But whether or not you want to be on their radar in that way.
Right.
So I'd say the majority
putting a target on your back.
That's right. So I'd say the majority of folks that do include a charitable organization tend to not inform them. So the charity really just is excited, to hear, hey, that someone passed away. We're so sorry. We didn't really know them, but we, heard about them once. So they came to some dinners. And by the way, they left you a sizable gift in their estate, that they can just be excited after the fact.
Yeah. And I mean, what an incredible job, to be appointed that position of trustee over those funds that are meant and intended for charitable purposes.
Yeah.
What a great task.
What a joy.
To be left
I mean,
with.
we have some clients who will set up not just a foundation, but there's something else called donor advised funds. I think we've talked about those in earlier episodes. But if they were to pass away, you can transition that to your family members to be the ones who are kind of in control. And just like you said, what a cool legacy. That's not money they can spend on themselves, but it's money that they now have the responsibility to steward and to give away, and to just almost help create that spirit of generosity, to be excited about, hey, I get to give away, $300,000 over the next 2 years. Yep. And I want to make these gifts in a good way. So that's a great one.
I love that. All right. We have time for just one more.
All right. One more myth.
Only just like a minute or two.
Okay. We'll go fast.
So myth number 4, my family never fights. We all get along.
Right. They're just going to figure it out and they'll be fine.
They'll just talk it out.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I would call it a myth. I mean, families are great, but man, it's so much better to have this written down. And I'll give you 2 quick examples. One, we had a family recently that there's a home that is going to be split amongst the kids, and it's kind of a vacation getaway family cabin type thing. And one of the siblings says, wonderful, I'd never sell that. I love going there. It's so wonderful.
Many good memories there. I want my kids to experience that. I would
Our
never, ever sell that home.
Nope. And then you have the other sibling who has also enjoyed it, but says, well, if we were to sell it, don't I get like X amount of dollars? That'd be so important for me and my family right now. I could use the money.
I've got to pay for so-and-so's education coming up.
Yes. And so even though the siblings get along, now all of a sudden this giant wedge just got stuck between them, and it's real money. It's really important. And now their interests are disaligned. And so what could have been a real easy administration now just becomes difficult. You have 2 siblings who are, or 3 or 4, siblings who are hit. The other thing that comes up is when I was at a larger law firm, I sat next to an office where the woman in there, she dealt with trust administration. That's all she did. Trust litigation. Sorry. So every day she was on the phone with people who were fighting, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles who were fighting over their trust. And I get to hear it from the other office. And man, I remember stories that she would tell of one saying, I don't really care if I get anything from the trust. At this point, I just don't want my brother to get anything. I mean, how horrible, right? And I'm sure they had other issues before that, but the litigation brought out the worst in them. And I think for parents, when they think of estate planning, it should not be who's going to fight over my stuff. I mean, most parents want this to be wind in their sails, rocket fuel for their kids, to really just push them forward in their lives, not to slow them down and cause this big inter-family fight. So without planning, what's the military, failing to plan is planning to fail. I think there's some elements of a legacy for a parent generation is not just how much money, it's not just how they get to the next generation, but it's how that next generation can kind of live in harmony and support each other and move forward. So estate planning is so useful. These are some myths that we hear all the time, that I hear all the time. And I think moving past that is so valuable to clients.
Well, we hope today's episode has been helpful to crack some of the myths that we tell ourselves. If you need an estate plan or you have any questions about an existing estate plan give us a call. We're your people and we're happy to help. Thanks for listening. We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricoreadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricoreadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.